Wyoming Territory, 1880. The desolate wind howled across the snow-covered plains like a beast claiming its territory. 26-year-old Heath Keller hunched forward in his saddle, his gloved hands stiff around the reins as he urged his gelding through knee-deep snow. The mercury had plummeted an hour ago, turning the gentle snowfall into a raging blizzard that threatened to swallow him whole. "Just a little further, Rusty," he murmured to his horse, though his words were immediately devoured by the wind. Heath had been riding for the Broken Spur Ranch for nearly 3 years now, and in all his years of cowboying, he had never seen a storm descend so quickly. But that was the way of the frontier, beautiful one minute, deadly the next. Just like the people who inhabited it, he had learned that lesson the hard way. Out here, a man could only rely on himself. Trusting others was a weakness he couldn't afford, not after watching his father's kindness repaid with betrayal and a bullet. The memory of finding his pa bleeding out on their modest homestead floor still visited him in nightmares. His father had taken in a stranger, offered him work and shelter, only to be robbed and left for dead when the man discovered the small lockbox where they kept their meager savings. Heath had been 17 then. Now at 26 he lived by a simple code: keep your head down, do your job, and never let anyone close enough to hurt you. The frontier was no place for soft hearts. It was a place for survival, nothing more. A gust of wind nearly knocked him sideways in the saddle. He needed shelter and fast. The line shack he was aiming for was still miles away, and darkness was falling rapidly. Squinting through the white veil of snow, Heath spotted a dark shape in the distance, too regular to be natural. A structure of some kind. Adjusting his course, he rode toward it, hope kindling despite his usual caution. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into a small, abandoned cabin, its windows dark and door hanging partially open. Abandoned or not, it would shield him from the killing cold. Heath dismounted with difficulty, his legs stiff from the cold. He led Rusty around to the lee side of the cabin where a crude lean-to offered minimal protection. After unsaddling him and throwing his blanket over the animal's back, Heath gathered his saddlebags and pushed through the cabin's half-open door. The interior was dark and smelled of dust and abandonment, but as Heath's eyes adjusted, he realized he wasn't alone. A figure lay crumpled near the cold fireplace. His hand moved instinctively to his revolver, but something about the stillness of the form gave him pause. Taking a cautious step forward, Heath realized it was a woman, curled on her side, seemingly unconscious. "Ma'am," he called, his voice rough from the cold. When she didn't respond, Heath moved closer, kneeling beside her. She was young, perhaps 20 or 21, with pale skin made paler by the cold. Her chestnut brown hair had fallen loose from what must have been an elegant arrangement, and her traveling clothes, though now rumpled and dirty, were clearly expensive. A small leather valise lay nearby, along with a broken lantern. Heath removed his glove and pressed 2 fingers to her neck, feeling a faint but steady pulse. Relief washed through him, followed immediately by wariness. What was a well-dressed woman doing alone in an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere during a blizzard? It wasn't his concern, a voice in his head insisted. His only responsibility was to survive the night, yet even as the thought formed, Heath was already shrugging out of his heavy coat and draping it over her still form. "Ma'am," he tried again, gently shaking her shoulder, "can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing eyes the color of summer sage. For a moment she stared at him uncomprehendingly, then fear flooded her features and she scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall. "Stay back," she warned, her voice surprisingly strong despite her obvious weakness. "I have a gun." Heath raised his hands slowly. "I mean no harm, ma'am, just seeking shelter from the storm, same as you, I reckon." She stared at him, her gaze taking in his trail-worn clothes, his weather-beaten face. Something in his expression must have reassured her, for her shoulders relaxed slightly, though wariness remained in her eyes. "You're frozen half to death," Heath said, nodding toward the cold fireplace. "Mind if I build us a fire?" After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Heath busied himself examining the fireplace, relieved to find it sound and the chimney clear. From his saddlebags he retrieved a small bundle of kindling he always carried for emergencies, and soon had a small flame flickering to life. The woman watched him work, her back still pressed against the wall, but as warmth began to fill the small space, he noticed her trembling begin to subside. "My name's Heath Keller," he offered as he fed another stick to the growing fire. "I ride for the Broken Spur southeast of here." She hesitated before answering, Willow Fletcher." Heath nodded, not pressing for more information. It wasn't his business why she was here or what she was running from, if she was running at all. Out here, everyone had stories they preferred to keep to themselves. "You hurt anywhere, Miss Fletcher?" he asked, noting how she winced when she shifted position. "Just cold and hungry," she admitted. "My horse spooked and threw me this morning when the storm began. I lost my provisions with him." Heath reached for his saddlebags again. "Not much, but it's something," he said, offering her jerky and hardtack, "and I've got coffee." As Willow accepted the food with murmured thanks, Heath studied her more carefully. Despite her disheveled appearance, there was an unmistakable dignity in the way she held herself. Her hands, though reddened from cold, were soft and uncalloused, not the hands of someone accustomed to physical labor. Yet there was something in her eyes that spoke of determination and resilience. "You're a long way from anywhere, Miss Fletcher," Heath observed as he set a small pot of snow by the fire to melt for coffee. She met his gaze steadily. "I could say the same of you, Mr. Keller." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. Fair enough. As the night deepened and the storm raged outside, they maintained a careful distance, yet the shared warmth of the fire created an unexpected intimacy. Heath found himself telling her about the broken spur, about his foreman who was fair but demanding, about the spring roundup that would begin in a few months if the winter ever relinquished its grip. In turn, Willow shared carefully edited stories of her life back east, of the finishing school she had attended, of her journey west by train. But Heath noticed what she didn't say, where exactly she had come from, or where she was heading, or why she was traveling alone through such dangerous territory. It wasn't until the fire had burned down to embers and they had settled on opposite sides of it to sleep that Willow spoke again, her voice soft in the darkness. "Thank you, Mr. Keller, for the fire." "And the food." Heath stared up at the cabin's rough-hewn ceiling, just doing what anyone would do. "No," she said with quiet certainty, "not everyone." Her words stayed with him as he drifted into a light, watchful sleep. She was right, of course. The frontier bred a particular kind of callousness. He had seen men ride past others in distress, unwilling to risk their own safety. He had nearly become one of them. Yet something about finding her here, alone and vulnerable, had pierced through the armor he had built around himself. It was a dangerous crack, one he would need to seal come morning. When the storm passed, they would go their separate ways, and Heath would return to the solitary life he had chosen. It was safer that way. Letting people in only led to pain and betrayal. His father's fate had taught him that much. But as he listened to Willow's steady breathing across the fire, Heath couldn't help but wonder what her story truly was, and why fate had brought them together in this abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere. The answer, when it came, would change everything he thought he knew about trust, about connection, and about his place in the vast, unforgiving frontier. Morning arrived with an eerie silence, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Heath woke first, instantly alert as sunlight streamed through the cabin's dirty window. Across the dead fireplace Willow slept on, her chestnut hair spread across her makeshift pillow of folded clothing, her face softer in sleep than it had been in wakefulness. Heath rose quietly, stretching muscles stiff from the cold floor. Outside, he found Rusty pawing at the snow, searching for grass beneath. The world was transformed, blanketed in pristine white that sparkled painfully bright under the clear sky. The temperature had risen slightly, but Heath knew from experience that the respite might be temporary. He returned to the cabin to find Willow awake, attempting to bring order to her tangled hair with her fingers. "Storms passed," he informed her, trying not to notice how the sunlight caught the golden highlights in her brown hair. "If you'll tell me which direction you're headed, I can help you get there." She looked up at him, her expression guarded. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to delay you." "No delay," he said with a shrug. "I was just delivering a message to the line shack about moving some cattle, already a day late on account of the storm." Willow stood, smoothing down her skirts with dignity despite their rumpled state. "I'm headed to Whispering Pines." Heath couldn't hide his surprise. Whispering Pines was one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, owned by some eastern businessman who, rumor had it, had never even set foot on his property. The ranch was managed by a hard-nosed foreman named Caldwell who had a reputation for running a tight outfit. "You have business at Whispering Pines?" he asked, curiosity overcoming his usual reserve. A smile flickered briefly across her face. "You could say that." Before he could press further, Willow picked up her small valise. "Shall we go? I've imposed on your kindness long enough." Outside, the problem of transportation became immediately apparent. "We'll have to double up on Rusty," Heath said, nodding toward his gelding, "unless you think your horse might have sought shelter nearby." Willow shook her head. Alabaster is probably halfway back to the station by now. He never did like me much. There was something in her wry tone that made Heath smile despite himself. Rusty here is steady enough for both of us. Whispering Pines is about 10 miles west. We can make it by midday if the snow isn't too deep. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her, acutely aware of her stiffness as she sat perched at the front of the saddle. Heath kept a respectful distance, his hands on the reins that extended on either side of her, but the intimate arrangement was unavoidable. As they set out, the warmth of her body against his was a distraction he hadn't anticipated. The journey was slow but steady, Rusty picking his way carefully through snow drifts that sometimes reached his chest. Conversation came in fits and starts, punctuated by long silences that were surprisingly comfortable. "How long have you been a cowboy, Mr. Keller?" Willow asked as they crossed a frozen creek, the ice creaking ominously beneath them. "Since I was 17, Heath replied, guiding Rusty to more solid ground. "Started as a wrangler, worked my way up." "And before that?" Heath hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing his past. "My father had a small homestead in Colorado, raised a few head of cattle, some crops, nothing fancy." "And your mother?" "Died when I was young, fever." "I'm sorry," Willow said softly, and Heath could hear genuine empathy in her voice. "My mother passed when I was 16. It changes you, doesn't it?" The simple acknowledgement of shared loss created an unexpected connection between them. Before he could stop himself, Heath found himself telling her about his father's death, about the betrayal that had shaped his view of the world. "So you learn not to trust," Willow observed when he finished. "Learn to survive," Heath corrected. "Out here, trust is a luxury most can't afford." Willow was silent for a long moment. "And yet you stopped to help a stranger in a blizzard." Her words hit him with unexpected force. It was true, he had acted against his own carefully constructed rules. Why? Because she was a woman alone, because the storm was deadly. Or was it something else, something about her specifically that had breached his defenses? "Like I said," he replied gruffly, "anyone would have done the same." Willow twisted slightly in the saddle to look at him, her sage-green eyes searching his face. "We both know that's not true, Mr. Keller, but I thank you for the lie." By midday, the distinctive arch of the Whispering Pines entrance came into view. The massive ranch spread across thousands of acres, its main house set back from the road at the end of a long, tree-lined drive. Even from this distance, Heath could see it was an impressive structure, far more substantial than the usual ranch houses of the territory. As they approached the entrance, Heath expected Willow to direct him to the servants' quarters or perhaps ask to be taken to the foreman's office. Instead, she asked him to proceed directly to the main house. "Are you sure?" he asked, surprised. "Caldwell runs a tight ship. They don't much like unexpected visitors." "I'm expected," she said simply. Puzzled but unwilling to argue, Heath guided Rusty down the drive. As they neared the house, activity erupted. Ranch hands emerged from the barn. A man Heath assumed was Caldwell came striding out of the house, and everyone seemed to be shouting at once. "Miss Fletcher," Caldwell called, his weather-beaten face a mask of relief. "Thank God. When your horse returned without you yesterday, we feared the worst." Heath felt Willow straighten in the saddle. "As you can see, Mr. Caldwell, I am perfectly fine, thanks to Mr. Keller here." Caldwell turned his attention to Heath, his expression shifting to one of suspicion. "And who might you be, sir?" Before Heath could answer, Willow slid from the saddle with surprising grace, given her night on a cabin floor. "Mr. Heath Keller of the Broken Spur found me during the storm and kindly offered shelter and escort. Please see that his horse is tended to and prepare a room for him. He'll be staying with us until he's properly rested." The authority in her voice was unmistakable, and Heath watched in amazement as Caldwell immediately nodded and began issuing orders to the assembled ranch hands. It was only then that the truth dawned on him. "You're not a visitor," he said slowly as he dismounted. "You're the owner." Willow's smile held a hint of mischief. "Willow Fletcher, at your service. And yes, Whispering Pines belongs to me, not to some absent Eastern businessman, as the rumors suggest." Heath stared at her, recalibrating everything he thought he knew. This young woman, barely 21 by her own admission, owned the largest cattle operation in the territory, and he had found her huddled in an abandoned cabin during a blizzard. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Willow's smile faded. "Because for a few hours it was nice to be treated as just another person, not as the woman who inherited a cattle empire." She glanced toward the house where servants were now hurrying about. "Come inside, Mr. Keller. I believe I owe you a proper meal and a comfortable bed for the night." As Heath followed her toward the imposing ranch house, he felt oddly disoriented. Willow Fletcher wasn't who he had thought she was. And his response to her, the instinctive protectiveness, the surprising ease of conversation, now seemed more complicated than he had realized. One thing was clear. The simple plan of sheltering a stranger and continuing on his way had become something else entirely. Something that threatened the careful distance Heath had maintained from the world since his father's death. And as Willow glanced back at him, her sage-green eyes holding his for a moment before she turned to address a hovering servant, Heath felt a jolt of recognition. The danger here wasn't just to his body in a blizzard, it was to the fortress he had built around his heart. The interior of the Whispering Pines ranch house stunned Heath with its unexpected elegance. Rich carpets from back east covered polished wooden floors, and the furniture, while sturdy enough for frontier life, showed a refinement rarely seen in Wyoming Territory. Oil paintings in gilded frames adorned walls of actual plastered wallpaper, not the rough-hewn logs he was accustomed to. "Please make yourself comfortable," Willow said, gesturing toward a sitting room where a fire blazed in a stone hearth. "I'll have food brought immediately, and hot water for bathing if you wish." Heath stood awkwardly, suddenly acutely aware of his trail-worn appearance. "This isn't necessary, Miss Fletcher. I should be getting back." "Nonsense," she interrupted firmly. "The storm may have passed, but the temperature is dropping again. The least I can do is offer you proper hospitality after you saved my life." "I didn't save," Heath began, but the look she gave him silenced his protest. "Without shelter, I would have frozen to death," Willow stated matter-of-factly. "We both know it. Now please sit while I arrange for our meal." Left alone, Heath reluctantly settled into a leather armchair that was more comfortable than any bed he'd slept in for years. The warmth of the fire and the softness of the chair conspired against his usual alertness, and he found himself drifting, exhaustion from the night's vigil catching up with him. He was startled awake by the arrival of a middle-aged woman carrying a tray laden with food. "Miss Fletcher asked me to bring this straight away," the woman said, setting the tray on a side table. "She's gone to change but will join you shortly. I'm Mrs. Tanner, the housekeeper." Heath nodded his thanks, his mouth watering at the sight of fresh bread, slices of roast beef, and what appeared to be apple pie. Mrs. Tanner poured him coffee from a silver pot before withdrawing, leaving Heath to contemplate the sudden change in his circumstances. 24 hours ago, he had been riding through a snowstorm, focused only on reaching shelter before nightfall. Now he sat in the finest house he had ever entered, awaiting the return of a woman who had completely upended his expectations. Willow reappeared just as Heath was finishing his second slice of pie. She had changed into a simple but elegant day dress of deep blue that complemented her chestnut hair, which was now neatly arranged in a practical yet becoming style. She looked every inch the wealthy rancher's daughter, or in this case, the wealthy rancher herself. "I hope the food was satisfactory," she said, taking a seat across from him. "Best meal I've had in years," Heath admitted. "But I still don't understand why you're going to all this trouble." Willow regarded him steadily. "Is gratitude such a foreign concept, Mr. Keller?" "No, but," he gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "This seems excessive for simply sharing a fire during a storm." "Perhaps I'm not only repaying a debt," Willow said, her voice softening. "Perhaps I'm also enjoying the company of someone who saw me as just another traveler in need, not as the owner of Whispering Pines." There was something in her tone that resonated with Heath, a loneliness he recognized all too well. He had chosen isolation as protection. Willow, it seemed, had isolation thrust upon her by her position. "How did you come to own all this?" he asked, curiosity overcoming his usual reticence. "If you don't mind my asking." Willow's expression grew somber. "My father purchased Whispering Pines 5 years ago as an investment. He was a banker in Boston with grand ideas about Western expansion. He visited twice, fell in love with the territory, and planned to retire here eventually." She paused, her fingers tracing the pattern on her dress. "He and my stepmother died in a carriage accident last year. As his only child, I inherited everything." "I'm sorry," Heath said, the simple words inadequate for the loss he saw reflected in her eyes. "Thank you," Willow straightened her shoulders. "I could have sold, of course." That's what everyone expected, the helpless Eastern girl, unable to manage such a vast enterprise. "But my father loved this place, and I discovered that I do too." So you came out here alone. To run the ranch yourself. A smile touched her lips. Not entirely alone, Mr. Caldwell has been invaluable, and I did spend 3 months learning everything I could about cattle ranching before making the journey. Her smile widened. You should have seen my stepmother's friends' faces when I announced my intentions. They were scandalized. Despite himself, Heath found himself smiling in return. I can imagine. No, you really can't, Willow laughed, and the sound transformed her face, bringing a warmth to her eyes that caught Heath off guard. One of them actually fainted. Proper Boston ladies do not become cattle ranchers. And are you a proper Boston lady? I was, Willow said thoughtfully, or I tried to be for my father's sake. But I've always been more comfortable with open skies than drawing rooms. She met his gaze directly. What about you, Mr. Keller? What keeps you writing for other men's brands instead of building something of your own? The question was surprisingly perceptive, hitting closer to home than Heath would have liked. He had avoided putting down roots since his father's death, telling himself it was the freedom of the cowboy life that appealed to him. But Willow had identified the truth with unsettling accuracy. He worked for others because it was safer than investing himself in something that could be taken away. Before he could formulate a response, Mrs. Tanner appeared in the doorway. Miss Fletcher, Mr. Caldwell would like a word about the north pasture fence, and the hot water for Mr. Keller's bath is ready. Willow rose gracefully. Thank you, Mrs. Tanner. Please show Mr. Keller to the guest room. To Heath, she added, rest, refresh yourself. We can continue our conversation at dinner if you're willing. Heath found himself nodding, though a voice in the back of his mind warned that staying longer was unwise. There was something about Willow Fletcher that made him want to lower his guard, and that was precisely what he couldn't afford to do. Yet as he followed Mrs. Tanner upstairs to a guest room more luxurious than any hotel he had ever seen, Heath couldn't deny a growing curiosity about the young woman who had defied convention to claim her inheritance. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, poised yet unpretentious, wealthy yet unafraid of hardship. And despite his best efforts, he found himself looking forward to dinner. The meal, served in a dining room that could have been transported directly from an eastern mansion, was both elaborate and surprisingly comfortable. Willow proved to be an attentive hostess, drawing Heath into conversation about his life as a cowboy, sharing stories of her own adjustment to ranch life, and generally creating an atmosphere of easy camaraderie that belied their brief acquaintance. Mr. Caldwell tells me you handled yourself admirably during the blizzard, she said as servants cleared away the remains of a desert involving more chocolate than Heath had seen in one place before. He says not many men would know to seek shelter instead of pushing on. Heath shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I've seen what happens to those who don't respect the weather out here. Yes, I'm learning that lesson myself, Willow acknowledged. I should never have attempted to return from Cheyenne with a storm threatening, but I was so eager to get home, she trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. Home, Heath repeated, testing the word. You consider Whispering Pines home now. Willow's expression softened. Is that so surprising? The East hasn't felt like home since my father died. Here I have purpose, independence. She hesitated before adding, though I'll admit there are times when the isolation is challenging. The admission revealed a vulnerability that resonated with Heath more than he wanted to acknowledge. He understood isolation all too well, had chosen it, even, but hearing Willow speak of it as a burden rather than a protection stirred something in him. You seem to have adjusted well, he offered. Running a ranch this size isn't easy for anyone, let alone a woman, Willow finished with an arch of her eyebrow. Heath had the grace to look chagrined. I was going to say someone raised in the city, but fair enough. Willow laughed, the sound warming the formal dining room. The cattle don't care if I wear skirts, Mr. Keller. And the men respect competence, regardless of who demonstrates it. Her expression grew more serious. Though I'll admit, proving that competence has been an uphill battle. As the evening progressed, their conversation meandered through topics both mundane and meaningful. Heath found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone, about his mother's love of poetry, about his father's dreams for their small homestead, about the wandering years after his father's death when he had drifted from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to form attachments. In turn, Willow spoke of her childhood in Boston, her education at a prestigious ladies' academy, and her secret relief when her father announced his intention to retire to Wyoming Territory. I always felt constrained by society's expectations, she confessed, The endless rounds of parties, the pressure to make a suitable match, it was suffocating. She glanced around the ornate dining room with a wry smile. Ironic that I ended up with a house that could host the very sort of gatherings I was trying to escape. But you don't, Heath observed. Host gatherings, I mean. No, Willow agreed. Out here I can be judged on my actions rather than my adherence to social norms. It's liberating. The word lingered between them, highlighting the fundamental difference in their approaches to the frontier. Where Willow had found freedom, Heath had found only confirmation of his belief that isolation was the only safe way to exist. Yet sitting across from her in the warm dining room, watching the way the lamplight caught the highlights in her chestnut hair and the intelligence in her sage-green eyes, Heath felt the first stirrings of doubt about the life he had chosen. The evening ended with reluctance on both sides, though neither acknowledged it openly. As Willow bid him good night at the foot of the grand staircase, Heath found himself wishing for reasons to extend their conversation. I should leave tomorrow, he said instead, retreating to practicality. My foreman will be wondering what happened to me. Of course, Willow agreed, though he thought he detected a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. But please know you're welcome to return to Whispering Pines anytime, Mr. Keller. Heath, he said impulsively. If we're going to be neighbors, you might as well use my given name. Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Heath then, and you must call me Willow. As Heath climbed the stairs to his borrowed bedroom, he tried to dismiss the strange mixture of anticipation and unease that filled him. Willow Fletcher represented everything he had avoided since his father's death: connection, vulnerability, the possibility of loss. She was dangerous precisely because she made him want to lower the walls he had so carefully constructed. Tomorrow he would return to the broken spur and the solitary existence he had crafted. It was safer that way, simpler. But as he lay in the most comfortable bed he had experienced in years, Heath couldn't help but wonder if safety and simplicity were poor substitutes for whatever it was that had flickered to life during his conversations with Willow. And for the first time in nearly a decade, he fell asleep thinking not of the past and its lessons in betrayal, but of the future and its unexpected possibilities. Spring came to Wyoming Territory in fits and starts, with warm days giving way to sudden snowstorms, only to thaw again under the strengthening sun. At the broken spur, Heath threw himself into the demanding work of spring roundup, driving himself harder than usual, as if physical exhaustion might quiet the thoughts that had plagued him since his night at Whispering Pines. 2 months had passed since the blizzard, yet he found himself thinking of Willow Fletcher at odd moments. While writing fence lines in the pale dawn light, during the quiet evenings when the other hands played cards or shared stories around the bunkhouse stove. He had not returned to Whispering Pines despite her invitation, telling himself it was better this way. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The annual livestock auction in Cheyenne brought ranchers from across the territory together to buy breeding stock and sell prime cattle. Heath, accompanying his foreman to help drive newly purchased bulls back to the broken spur, found himself face to face with Willow in the crowded auction yard. She saw him first, her face lighting with recognition as she made her way through the crush of cowboys, ranchers, and livestock. Dressed in a practical riding habit of forest green, her chestnut hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, she looked every inch the capable rancher, and more beautiful than Heath remembered. Heath Keller, she said, extending her hand. I was beginning to think you'd fallen off the edge of the territory. Heath removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his dusty appearance after the long ride to Cheyenne. Miss Fletcher, Willow, he corrected at her pointed look. Good to see you. Is it? She asked, her direct gaze challenging him. You never took me up on my invitation to return to Whispering Pines. Heath shifted uncomfortably. Been busy with spring roundup. As have we all, she replied, but her smile took any sting from the words. Are you here for the auction or just passing through? Auction, the boss is looking to improve our breeding stock. Heath nodded toward where his foreman, Tom Riley, was examining a group of Hereford bulls. Are you? The same, though I'm also selling some of our yearlings. Willow glanced around the crowded yard. Have you eaten? The hotel restaurant is serving lunch, and it's far less chaotic than this madhouse. The invitation was casual, yet Heath hesitated. Sharing a meal meant conversation, and conversation with Willow had proven dangerously easy during their previous encounter. I should help Riley with the bulls, he began, but the older man looked up at that moment and waved him off. Go on, Keller, Riley called. I won't be ready to bid for another hour at least. Finding himself without excuse, Heath reluctantly agreed. As they made their way toward the hotel, he was acutely aware of the sidelong glances they attracted. A young woman, clearly wealthy despite her practical attire, walking companionably beside a trail-worn cowboy. "People are staring," he murmured. Willow's laugh was low and unconcerned. "Let them. Half of them already think I'm scandalous for running my own ranch. What's one more breach of propriety?" The hotel restaurant was crowded, but relatively quiet compared to the auction yard. They found a table near a window overlooking the main street, and after ordering, Willow regarded Heath with undisguised curiosity. "So, how have you been, Heath Keller?" The simple question somehow demanded an honest answer. "Working," he said, thinking more than usual. "About what?" Heath met her gaze. "About why I didn't take you up on your invitation." Willow's eyes widened slightly at his directness, but she didn't look away. "And did you reach a conclusion?" "I decided it was safer not to." "Safer," she repeated, considering the word. "From what?" "From you," Heath thought but didn't say. "From the way you make me question everything I've believed about keeping people at a distance." Instead, he said, "From complications. A cowboy's life is simple by necessity." "Ah," Willow nodded, a hint of disappointment crossing her features. "And I represent complication." Their food arrived before Heath could respond, providing a welcome diversion. As they ate, the conversation shifted to safer topics: the auction prices, the weather, the prospects for summer grazing. Yet underneath the mundane exchange ran a current of unspoken questions and tentative connection. It wasn't until they were finishing their meal that Willow returned to their earlier discussion. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've found that the things we avoid out of fear of complication are often the very things most worth pursuing." Heath studied her, struck by the quiet confidence in her voice. "Is that why you came out here instead of selling the ranch? Because it was worth the complication?" "Exactly," Willow smiled. "Everyone told me it would be too difficult, too dangerous, too improper." "But difficult isn't the same as wrong." She leaned forward slightly. "The broken spur isn't far from Whispering Pines. Our ranches will be neighbors for years to come. Wouldn't it be simpler in the long run if we were friends rather than cautious acquaintances?" Put that way, it sounded entirely reasonable. Yet Heath knew there was nothing simple about the pull he felt toward this remarkable woman. "Perhaps," he conceded, "but friendship requires trust." "Yes," Willow agreed softly. "It does." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Heath felt something shift inside him, a hairline crack in the wall he had built around himself since his father's death. Before he could examine the feeling further, a commotion erupted outside the restaurant window. A wagon had overturned in the street, spilling crates and barrels across the dusty thoroughfare. Without thinking, Heath was on his feet and moving toward the door, Willow close behind him. Outside, a frantic man was trying to calm a team of panicked horses while bystanders gathered around the scattered cargo. Heath immediately went to the horses' heads, speaking soothingly as he took hold of their bridles. "Easy now, easy," he murmured, his presence calming the animals. Willow, meanwhile, had begun organizing the gathering crowd into a salvage operation, her clear voice cutting through the confusion with practical instructions. Within minutes, men were righting the wagon, while others collected the scattered goods. Working side by side, Heath and Willow helped restore order to the chaotic scene. He couldn't help but notice her competence, the way she directed the effort without hesitation yet managed to make everyone feel valued in the process. It was leadership of a kind he rarely witnessed, effective without being domineering. When the last of the cargo had been reloaded and the grateful wagon driver had continued on his way, Heath found himself standing beside Willow in the middle of the street, both of them dusty and disheveled from their impromptu rescue. "Well," Willow said, brushing dirt from her skirts, "that was unexpected." Heath found himself smiling. "You handled it well. Not many ladies of your standing would have pitched in like that." "I'm not many ladies," she replied with a quirk of her eyebrow. "No," Heath agreed softly, "you're certainly not." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibility, until a voice called Willow's name from down the street. Turning, they saw Mr. Caldwell approaching with a rancher Heath didn't recognize. "I should go," Willow said, regret coloring her tone. "Cattle business awaits." Heath nodded, suddenly reluctant to see her leave. "It was good seeing you again, Willow." She hesitated, then reached out to touch his arm briefly. "The invitation stands, Heath. Whispering Pines is always open to you." As she walked away to join Caldwell, Heath watched her go with the unsettling realization that he very much wanted to accept that invitation. The crack in his defenses was widening, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he wanted to repair it. 2 weeks later, Heath found himself riding through Whispering Pines property, following the directions Riley had given him to deliver a message to Caldwell about a shared water rights issue. He told himself his quickened pulse was due to the brisk pace he'd set, not anticipation at possibly seeing Willow again. The ranch headquarters came into view as he crested a rise, the impressive main house, the extensive outbuildings, the well-maintained corrals and barns. It was a testament to careful management and substantial investment. Even more impressive was the herd of cattle visible in the distance, their quality evident even from afar. As Heath approached the main yard, he saw ranch hands engaged in various tasks, mending tack, shoeing horses, repairing a wagon wheel. And in the midst of it all was Willow, deep in conversation with a cowboy who was gesturing toward a section of corral fencing. She was dressed for ranch work in a split riding skirt and plain shirtwaist, her hair braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Heath reined in, watching as she nodded thoughtfully at whatever the man was explaining, then issued what appeared to be clear instructions. The cowboy touched his hat respectfully and moved off to implement her directives. It was only then that Willow noticed Heath's approach. The smile that spread across her face sent an unexpected warmth through him. "Heath Keller," she called, walking toward him as he dismounted. "To what do we owe this pleasure?" "Message from Riley about the North Creek water rights," he explained, producing the sealed envelope from his saddlebag. "For Caldwell. He's out with the herd today, but I can make sure he gets it." Willow accepted the envelope, studying Heath's face. "You rode all this way just to deliver a letter." Heath shrugged. Riley said it was important. "I see." Willow's expression suggested she saw more than Heath intended. "Well, since you've come all this way, you must stay for lunch at least." Before Heath could formulate an excuse, a commotion erupted from the direction of the barn. A young horse had broken free from the corral and was heading directly toward them, eyes wild with panic. Heath reacted instinctively, pushing Willow behind him as he faced the oncoming animal. With practiced movements, he stood his ground until the last moment, then stepped sideways, catching the horse's halter as it passed. The momentum nearly jerked him off his feet, but Heath held firm, gradually slowing the frightened animal to a stop. "Easy boy," he murmured, stroking the horse's sweating neck. "Easy now." Ranch hands came running, but Heath had the situation well in hand. The horse, though still trembling, had calmed under his steady touch. "Sorry, Miss Fletcher," a young wrangler called as he approached cautiously. He spooked when the blacksmith dropped his tools. "No harm done, Jim," Willow replied, her voice steady despite the near mishap. To Heath she added quietly, "That was impressive." Heath shrugged off the compliment as he handed the halter rope to the wrangler. "Just experience." "Experience applied at exactly the right moment," Willow countered. She studied him with new appreciation. "You have a way with horses." "Always have," Heath admitted. "Even as a boy, I could calm the ones others couldn't handle." A thoughtful expression crossed Willow's face. "We have several young horses that need breaking. Our regular trainer broke his leg last month and we're behind schedule." She hesitated before continuing. "I don't suppose you'd consider helping out." "We'd pay well for your expertise." The offer caught Heath off guard. Working at Whispering Pines, even temporarily, would mean regular contact with Willow, exactly what he'd been avoiding. "I have obligations at the Broken Spur," he began, but Willow wasn't deterred. "I could speak to Riley. Experienced horse trainers are hard to come by, and if the Broken Spur can spare you for a few weeks, it would be a great help to us." There was something in her expression, a blend of professional need and personal hope, that made refusal difficult. And if he were honest with himself, the prospect of spending more time with Willow was not unwelcome, despite his misgivings. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Willow's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "That's all I ask," she gestured toward the house. "Now about that lunch." This time Heath didn't refuse. As they walked toward the main house, he found himself noticing the easy way Willow interacted with her ranch hands. A word of encouragement here, a question about a family member there. It was clear they respected her not just as their employer but as a capable leader. "You've earned their loyalty," Heath observed as they entered the house. Willow glanced at him, surprised by his perception. "I try to." A ranch this size runs on more than just wages, it needs shared purpose. It was an insight that revealed Willow's understanding of what truly made a ranch successful, beyond good grass and water rights. And it was one more thing about her that Heath found himself admiring against his better judgment. Lunch was served in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. As they ate, Willow outlined her challenge with the young horses, describing each animal's temperament and the training they had received thus far. Heath found himself engaged despite his reservations, offering suggestions and asking questions that revealed his expertise. By the time they finished eating, he had a clear picture of the work that needed doing and a growing desire to be the one to do it. "Let me talk to Riley," he said finally. "If he can spare me, I'll come back next week to look at your horses." The pleasure in Willow's eyes was reward enough for his decision. "I'll look forward to it." As Heath rode back to the Broken Spur that afternoon, he tried to convince himself that his decision was purely practical, good pay for work he excelled at. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. He wanted to see Willow Fletcher again. Wanted to understand the woman who had taken on a challenge most men would find daunting, who had earned the respect of hardened cowboys, who looked at him as if she saw something worth knowing. It was dangerous territory, this slow thawing of the ice he had cultivated around his heart. But as the miles passed beneath his horse's hooves, Heath found himself anticipating the weeks ahead with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The crack in his armor was widening, letting in light where before there had been only protective darkness. And for the first time since his father's death, Heath wasn't sure he wanted to repair it. Tom Riley, to Heath's surprise, was enthusiastic about the arrangement with Whispering Pines. "Good neighbors are worth their weight in gold out here," the foreman said when Heath approached him. "If we can help Willow Fletcher with her horse problems, all the better for relations between the ranches." There was something in Riley's tone that made Heath suspect the older man saw more than he let on, but he didn't press the issue. A week later, Heath rode into Whispering Pines with his bedroll and personal gear, prepared for a stay of several weeks. Willow met him at the bunkhouse, her professional demeanor barely concealing her pleasure at his arrival. "Mr. Caldwell will show you the horses after you've settled in," she said, gesturing to where the foreman waited near the corral. "I have some business in town today, but perhaps you could join me for dinner this evening to discuss your assessment." Heath agreed, trying to ignore the flutter of anticipation at the prospect of dining with Willow again. He spent the day evaluating the young horses, 8 in total, each with its own temperament and challenges. By evening, he had formed a clear plan for their training and was eager to share his thoughts. Dinner that night was served in the more intimate setting of Willow's study, rather than the formal dining room. Maps of the ranch hung on the walls, alongside ledgers and reference books about cattle breeding and range management. It was clearly a working space, yet comfortable, with well-worn leather chairs and a small table set before a stone fireplace. "So," Willow said as they finished their meal, "what do you think of our horses?" Heath outlined his assessment of each animal and his proposed training approach. Willow listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her own knowledge of horsemanship. "The bay gelding concerns me most," Heath concluded. "He's got spirit, but there's fear behind it. Someone handled him roughly in the past." Willow nodded. "We bought him from a rancher who was known for harsh methods. I hoped a gentler approach might salvage him." "It might," Heath agreed, "but it will take time and patience." "Both of which I'm willing to invest," Willow said firmly. "These horses represent the future of Whispering Pines. I want them trained right, not just broken to saddle." Her commitment to doing things properly, even when it meant more time and expense, impressed Heath. Too many ranchers viewed horses as mere tools, disposable when damaged or difficult. As the evening progressed, their conversation drifted from horses to ranch management, to Willow's plans for expanding Whispering Pines' breeding program, to Heath's observations about the changing cattle industry. It was easy, engaging talk that revealed their shared values despite their different backgrounds. "You know a great deal about ranching for someone who spent their life working for others," Willow observed as they lingered over coffee. Heath shrugged. "I watch, I listen, and I read when I can get my hands on agricultural journals." "You could run your own place," she said, studying him over the rim of her cup. "You have the knowledge." "Knowledge isn't enough," Heath replied. "It takes capital to start a ranch, and cowboy wages don't allow for much saving." Willow considered this. "My father started with very little. He built his banking business through partnerships and strategic investments." Banking's different from ranching. The principle is the same, Willow countered. Find people with complementary strengths and resources, and build something together that none could build alone. There was something in her tone that made Heath wonder if she was suggesting more than a general business principle. But before he could pursue the thought, she changed the subject, asking about his training schedule for the coming weeks. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Heath spent his mornings working with the horses, afternoons consulting with Caldwell about ranch operations, and evenings often in Willow's company, either in her study or walking the property as she showed him improvements she planned. Gradually, he found himself sharing more of his past with her, not just the facts of his father's death, but the impact it had on him, the lessons he had drawn from the betrayal, the walls he had built to protect himself from further loss. "You've been running from connection," Willow observed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Using your father's death as proof that trust leads only to pain." Heath started to deny it, then stopped, recognizing the truth in her words. "Maybe," he conceded, "but the lesson seemed clear enough at the time." "One betrayal, however terrible, doesn't define all humanity," Willow said gently. "My father trusted people, not blindly but with open eyes, and that trust built everything I now possess." "And yet you came out here alone," Heath pointed out. "Away from everyone who knew you." Willow was silent for a moment, her gaze on the darkening horizon. "Not to escape connection," she said finally, "to find it on different terms. In Boston, I was Charles Fletcher's daughter, defined by my family name and social standing. Here I can be known for my own actions, my own character." Her words resonated with Heath in ways he hadn't expected. Wasn't that what he had been doing too, in his own way? Defining himself through his work, his reliability, his independence. "And have you," he asked, "found connection here?" Willow turned to look at him, her expression soft in the fading light. "I'm beginning to." The simple statement hung in the air between them, filled with possibility. Heath felt a response rising within him, not just words, but a recognition of the growing bond between them, a bond that both terrified and exhilarated him. But before he could speak, the moment was broken by the arrival of a ranch hand with an urgent question about a sick cow. Willow excused herself, and the conversation was left unfinished, the potential acknowledgement unspoken. Yet something had shifted. As Heath retired to the bunkhouse that night, he knew that the walls he had maintained for so long were crumbling. Willow Fletcher, with her quiet strength and unwavering belief in the possibility of trust, had found the cracks in his defenses and gently, persistently widened them. And the most unsettling realization was that he no longer wanted to rebuild those walls. For the first time in years, Heath wanted to let someone in, not just anyone, but this remarkable woman who had faced her own challenges with courage and grace. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a tentative hope he had almost forgotten how to feel. The training of the young horses progressed well under Heath's guidance. Even the nervous bay gelding was showing improvement, responding to Heath's patient, consistent approach with growing trust. Word of his skill spread, and neighboring ranchers began to visit Whispering Pines to observe his methods. "You're becoming something of a local celebrity," Willow teased one afternoon as they watched a particularly successful session with a spirited mare. Heath snorted, uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm just doing what works." "What works better than anyone else's methods," Willow corrected. "Mr. Caldwell says we could start a side business in horse training with you at the helm." Though she spoke lightly, Heath caught the speculation in her tone. "Are you offering me a permanent position, Miss Fletcher?" "Would you consider it if I were?" She met his gaze directly, and Heath realized the question wasn't entirely theoretical. The prospect was both tempting and terrifying. Working at Whispering Pines permanently would mean being near Willow regularly, watching their connection deepen, perhaps into something more than friendship. It would mean opening himself to possibilities he had long denied. Before he could formulate a response, a commotion at the main gate drew their attention. A cloud of dust announced the arrival of several riders, their approach rapid enough to suggest urgency. As they drew closer, Heath recognized the lead rider, Tom Riley from the Broken Spur, his expression grim. Behind him rode 3 other ranch hands, all looking trail-worn and tense. "Miss Fletcher," Riley called as he dismounted. "Mr. Keller, we've got trouble." Willow stepped forward, her posture shifting subtly from casual to alert. "What kind of trouble, Mr. Riley?" "Rustlers," Riley said bluntly, "hit the Broken Spur last night." Took nearly 30 head from the north pasture. Heath felt a surge of anger. Cattle rustling was more than theft, it was a direct threat to the livelihood of everyone who worked the range. Any tracks? Riley nodded, heading west, then north. But we lost them in the rocky ground near Eagle Pass. He turned to Willow. Word is they're working their way through the territory, hitting one ranch after another. Thought you should be warned, Whispering Pines might be next. Thank you for the warning, Willow said, her voice calm but her expression serious. Have you notified the marshal? Sent a man to town, but Marshal Jenkins is away tracking some fugitives. Won't be back for days. Heath and Willow exchanged glances, both recognizing the implications. Without law enforcement, the ranchers would have to protect themselves. We should organize a patrol, Heath suggested. Cover the boundaries where your herds are most vulnerable. Willow nodded in agreement. Mr. Caldwell, she called to her foreman who had joined the gathering, please assemble the men. We need to establish a watch rotation immediately. As Caldwell moved to carry out her instructions, Willow turned back to Riley. The Broken Spur is welcome to coordinate with us. United, we'll present a stronger defense. Riley's weathered face showed appreciation for her quick understanding. That's why I came straight here. If these rustlers are working systematically, they might try to play us against each other. The next hours were a flurry of activity, as riders were dispatched to alert neighboring ranches and patrol schedules were established. Heath found himself working alongside Willow as an equal partner in the planning, his expertise in tracking and frontier defense complementing her knowledge of the territory. By nightfall, a coordinated defense was in place, with riders from Whispering Pines, the Broken Spur, and 2 smaller neighboring ranches patrolling the boundaries where their herds grazed. Willow insisted on taking a shift herself, despite Caldwell's concerns. It's my ranch, she said firmly when the foreman protested. I won't ask my men to face dangers I'm unwilling to confront myself. Heath, watching her check her rifle and saddle her horse in the gathering dusk, felt a surge of admiration for her courage. When she announced her intention to patrol the northern boundary, the area most likely to be targeted based on the rustler's pattern, he immediately volunteered to accompany her. 2 pairs of eyes are better than one, he said when she looked at him questioningly. The night was clear and cool, the spring air carrying the scent of sage and new grass as they rode along the ridge that marked Whispering Pines' northern border. Below them, barely visible in the moonlight, cattle grazed peacefully, unaware of the threat that had prompted this midnight vigil. They rode in companionable silence for a time, each scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. It was Willow who finally spoke, her voice soft against the background sounds of the night. Thank you for staying to help with this, she said. You could have returned to the Broken Spur with Riley. Heath shrugged, though the gesture was probably lost in the darkness. My work is here for now, the horses still need training. Is that the only reason you stayed? Willow's question hung in the air between them, deceptively simple yet laden with meaning. Heath reined in his horse, turning to face her. In the moonlight, her features were softened, her eyes luminous, yet he could still read the genuine inquiry in her expression. No, he admitted finally, it's not the only reason. Willow guided her horse closer to his, until they were nearly knee to knee. What are the other reasons, Heath Keller? The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings and possibilities. Heath had spent years avoiding precisely this kind of vulnerability, this opening of his carefully guarded self to another person. Yet here under the vast Wyoming sky with this extraordinary woman, the walls he had built seemed suddenly flimsy and unnecessary. You, he said simply, you're the other reason. Willow's intake of breath was audible in the quiet night. And what does that mean? It means, Heath began, but a movement in the valley below caught his attention. He held up a hand for silence, instantly alert. Willow followed his gaze, her posture shifting from intimate to vigilant in an instant. In the pale moonlight, dark figures moved among the cattle, at least 5 riders, working silently to separate a group of steers from the main herd. Rustlers, Heath whispered, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. We need to alert the others. Willow was already reaching for the signal pistol they carried for just this purpose. One shot would bring riders from the other patrol areas, but it would also alert the rustlers to their presence. Wait, Heath cautioned, placing his hand over hers. If we signal now, they might scatter before the others arrive. We need to get closer, see if we can identify them. Willow nodded, understanding his strategy. They left their horses secured behind the ridge and proceeded on foot, moving silently through the sagebrush toward the rustlers' position. As they drew nearer, the operation below became clearer, 5 men working efficiently to cut out prime steers, using low whistles and subtle movements to avoid startling the herd. They were professionals, not opportunistic thieves. Heath and Willow crept to within 50 yards, finding cover behind a large boulder. From this position, they could make out the rustlers' features in the moonlight. Heath felt a jolt of recognition as he identified the leader, a man known as Silas Reed, a notorious rustler with a reputation for violence. "I know him," Heath whispered to Willow. "Reed's dangerous, wanted in 3 territories. He won't hesitate to shoot if cornered." Willow's expression hardened. "Then we won't corner him. Signal the others now, and we'll keep them in sight until help arrives." The plan was sound, but fate intervened. As Willow raised the signal pistol, one of the rustlers happened to glance in their direction. Whether he saw movement or simply sensed their presence, the effect was immediate. He shouted a warning, and suddenly all 5 men were reaching for their weapons. The first shots came from the rustlers, bullets whining overhead as Heath pulled Willow down behind the boulder. He returned fire, aiming not to hit the men but to force them to take cover, buying time for the patrol riders to respond to Willow's signal flare that now illuminated the night sky. "Stay down," Heath ordered, positioning himself to shield Willow as he fired again. But Willow was not one to cower while others fought her battles. She had drawn her own rifle and was calmly taking aim at the rustlers' horses, her shots designed to prevent escape rather than cause injury. The exchange of gunfire continued for several tense minutes, neither side gaining advantage, until the thunder of approaching horses announced the arrival of reinforcements. The rustlers, recognizing their position was compromised, attempted to flee, but riders from the Broken Spur and Whispering Pines converged from multiple directions. In the confusion that followed, Heath lost sight of Reed. Concerned the rustler leader might circle back toward Willow's position, he began to move toward her, only to hear a horse's snort directly behind him. He turned to find Reed on horseback, revolver aimed directly at him. "Drop the gun, Cowboy," Reed snarled, "or I'll put a hole through you." Heath froze, calculating his options. Reed's finger was tightening on the trigger when a shot rang out, not from Reed's gun but from behind Heath. Reed jerked in the saddle, his revolver discharging harmlessly into the ground as he clutched his shoulder and wheeled his horse away. Heath spun to see Willow standing 10 feet away, her rifle still raised, her expression a mixture of determination and shock at what she had just done. "Are you hit?" she demanded, moving quickly to his side. "No," Heath assured her, eyes scanning for any sign of Reed's return. "That was some shooting." "I aimed for his arm," Willow said, her voice steadier than Heath would have expected from someone who had just shot a man for the first time. "I didn't want to kill him." Before Heath could respond, Riley and several Broken Spur cowboys rode up, followed closely by Caldwell and the Whispering Pines men. In the rapid exchange of information that followed, they learned that 3 of the rustlers had been captured, while Reed and one other had escaped, though Reed was wounded. "Marshal Jenkins will want to question the ones we caught," Riley said as the prisoners were secured. "Might light us to the rest of their gang." As the excitement subsided and plans were made to transport the captured rustlers to town, Heath found himself standing apart with Willow, both of them still processing the night's events. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Willow looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the fading moonlight. "You would have done the same for me." "Yes," Heath agreed, "I would have." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed, strengthened now by shared danger and mutual protection. "Before the rustlers appeared," Willow said hesitantly, "you were about to tell me something." Heath remembered the interrupted conversation, the question she had asked about his reasons for staying. In the aftermath of the gunfight, with the reality of mortality so freshly impressed upon them both, the barriers he had maintained for years seemed suddenly insignificant. "I was going to say," he continued where they had left off, "that you make me question everything I thought I knew about keeping my distance from people. About not letting anyone close enough to matter." Willow's breath caught, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? Heath took a step closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her sage-green eyes. "I'm beginning to think it might be the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." The moment hung between them, fragile and precious. Then Willow smiled, a slow, dawning expression that transformed her face and sent warmth coursing through Heath's veins. "Me too," she whispered. Before either could say more, Caldwell approached, needing Willow's direction on what to do with the captured rustler's horses. The intimate moment passed, but something fundamental had changed. As they rode back to the ranch in the pre-dawn light, Heath knew that the walls he had built around his heart were not just cracked but thoroughly breached. And for the first time since his father's death, he wasn't afraid of what that might mean. The days following the rustler incident were filled with activity. Depositions to the marshal when he returned, increased security measures for the herds, coordination with neighboring ranches to maintain vigilance against further attacks. Through it all, Heath and Willow worked side by side, their growing connection evident to everyone around them, though neither spoke of it openly. Heath continued training the horses, including the once fearful bay gelding who now approached him with cautious trust. The parallels were not lost on him. Like the horse, he too was learning to trust again after years of expecting only harm from connection. It was Willow who finally brought their unspoken feelings into the open. She found Heath in the training corral late one afternoon, working with the bay in the golden light of approaching sunset. "He's come a long way," she observed, leaning on the fence rail as Heath guided the horse through a series of gentle turns. "He just needed someone to show him not all humans are to be feared," Heath replied, patting the gelding's neck as he brought him to a halt. Willow's gaze was steady. "Some lessons are harder to learn than others." Heath recognized she wasn't just talking about the horse. He secured the bay in its stall before joining Willow by the fence, his heart beating faster than the light exertion warranted. "Willow," he began, uncharacteristically uncertain. "These past weeks have changed things," she finished for him, "haven't they?" Heath nodded, finding courage in her directness. "I came here to train horses, not to." "Not to fall in love," Willow suggested softly when he faltered. The word hung in the air between them, both terrifying and exhilarating. Heath had not allowed himself to use it, even in the privacy of his thoughts, but hearing it from Willow's lips made it impossible to deny any longer. "Yes," he acknowledged, his voice rough with emotion. "Not to fall in love, but I think I have anyway." Willow's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Good," she said simply. "Because I've fallen in love with you too." The admission, so straightforwardly delivered, stunned Heath momentarily. When he found his voice again, it was to voice the doubt that still lingered despite everything. "I'm just a cowboy, Willow." "You own the biggest ranch in the territory." "And what does that matter?" she challenged gently. "Do you think I care about status or wealth when I've spent my whole life trying to escape their constraints?" "People will talk," Heath warned. "Let them," Willow said with the same unconcern she had shown in Cheyenne. "What matters is what we build together, not what others think of it." Her confidence, her clarity about what she wanted and valued, swept away Heath's remaining reservations. In one fluid movement, he closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face as he kissed her with all the passion that had been building since that night in the abandoned cabin. Willow responded with equal fervor, her arms encircling his neck as she pressed against him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their faces flushed with more than the warm evening air. "I love you," Heath said, the words feeling both strange and perfectly natural on his lips. "I think I have since that night in the blizzard, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself." Willow laughed, the sound joyful and uninhibited. "We make quite a pair, the Boston banker's daughter and the solitary cowboy, both trying so hard to stand alone until fate threw us together in a snowstorm." Heath smiled, marveling at how right it felt to hold her, to plan a future that included connection rather than isolation. "My father used to say that the frontier reveals a person's true character. I think he was right, but he never mentioned it might also lead you to the person you're meant to find." "And have you found that person?" Willow asked, her eyes bright with happiness and a touch of playful challenge. Heath's answer was another kiss, gentle but filled with promise. Against her lips he murmured, "I believe I have." The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson as they stood together by the corral, the trained horses peaceful in their stalls, the vast expanse of whispering pines spreading around them like a kingdom built on courage and determination. And for Heath Keller, who had spent nearly a decade believing that trust was a weakness he couldn't afford, the warmth of Willow Fletcher in his arms was proof that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from finding someone to stand beside. Silas Reed did not accept defeat easily. 3 weeks after the failed rustling attempt, when the heightened security at Whispering Pines had begun to relax and life had settled into a new and joyful pattern for Heath and Willow, the outlaw returned, not to steal cattle but to exact revenge. Heath was in the stable, checking on a horse with a strained tendon, when the first shot rang out. He ducked instinctively, reaching for the revolver he no longer routinely wore now that the rustler threat seemed to have passed. Shouts erupted from the main yard, followed by more gunfire. Heath moved cautiously to the stable door, peering out to assess the situation. What he saw made his blood run cold. Reed and 4 men were in the ranch yard, guns blazing as they drove the Whispering Pines hands toward the bunkhouse. "Where's Fletcher?" Reed was shouting. "Bring her out." Heath's first thought was for Willow's safety. She had ridden out at dawn to check on a section of fence along the eastern boundary, accompanied by only a single ranch hand. With luck, she was still far from the ranch headquarters and the danger Reed presented. Moving silently along the edge of the building, Heath made his way toward the tack room where he knew a spare rifle was kept. He had just reached it when a voice behind him said, "Looking for this, Cowboy." Heath turned to find Reed standing in the shadows, a Winchester rifle trained on his chest. The outlaw's left arm was in a crude sling, evidence of Willow's marksmanship from their previous encounter. "Reed," Heath acknowledged, keeping his voice steady despite the hammer of his heart. "Come to get yourself arrested again." The outlaw's face darkened. "Come to settle a score. Your woman put a bullet in me. I aim to return the favor." "She's not here," Heath said, hoping to direct Reed's attention away from searching for Willow. "And if you've got any sense, you'll ride out before the marshal arrives. He's due any minute." Reed laughed harshly. "Nice try. We watched the marshal ride north this morning. Won't be back till tomorrow at the earliest." He gestured with the rifle. "Now move. We're going to wait for Miss Fletcher together. Make sure she gets a proper welcome when she returns." Heath had no choice but to comply, his mind racing for a way to warn Willow or to overcome Reed before she returned. As they emerged from the stable, he saw the rest of Reed's gang had rounded up the Whispering Pines hands, including Caldwell, and confined them to the bunkhouse under guard. Reed marched Heath to the main house, shoving him roughly onto the porch. "Comfortable place," the outlaw observed, glancing around the well-appointed interior as they entered. "Shame about what's going to happen to it." The implication was clear. Reed intended not just revenge against Willow, but the destruction of everything she had built. The thought filled Heath with cold rage, but he kept his expression neutral, watching for any opportunity to turn the tables. "She won't come meekly, you know," Heath said, playing for time. "Willow Fletcher's not the type to surrender even against odds." "Counting on it," Reed replied with a cruel smile. More satisfying that way. He positioned himself by the window, rifle ready, eyes scanning the approach to the ranch. "Your mistake was letting me live, Cowboy. I don't make the same errors." Hours passed in tense silence, Reed growing increasingly agitated as the day wore on with no sign of Willow. What neither man knew was that Willow had encountered a neighbor on her morning ride who warned her about suspicious riders seen heading toward Whispering Pines. Instead of returning directly to the ranch, she had circled around to observe from a distance, and had witnessed the attack from the safety of a wooded ridge. Now, as afternoon faded toward evening, Willow was executing a plan of her own, with the help of the ranch hand who had accompanied her and 2 cowboys from a neighboring spread whom she had encountered while seeking assistance. Heath, watching Reed's growing impatience, decided to try a different approach. "She's probably been delayed by ranch business," he suggested, "might not return until tomorrow." Reed turned from the window, suspicion in his eyes. "Then we'll wait. But every hour she's not here, one of your friends in the bunkhouse gets a bullet, starting with that foreman." Before Heath could respond, a rifle shot rang out from somewhere beyond the house. Reed jerked his head toward the sound, momentarily distracted. It was the opening Heath had been waiting for. He lunged forward, catching Reed around the waist and driving him backward into the wall. The outlaw's rifle discharged into the ceiling as they struggled. Despite his wounded arm, Reed fought with the desperation of a man who knew the penalty for his crimes. He managed to land a solid blow to Heath's jaw, momentarily stunning him. In that instant, Reed broke free and grabbed his fallen rifle. He was bringing it to bear on Heath when the front door burst open and Willow appeared, her own rifle raised. "Drop it, Reed," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her stance. Reed swung his weapon toward her instead, leaving Heath forgotten. It was a fatal mistake. Heath threw himself forward again, this time with enough force to send both himself and Reed crashing through the window in a shower of glass and splintered wood. They hit the ground hard, Heath landing atop the outlaw. The impact drove the breath from both men, but Heath recovered first, wrenching the rifle from Reed's grasp and tossing it aside. "It's over," he said, pinning the struggling man. "Your men are already in custody." It was true. While Heath had kept Reed occupied in the house, Willow and her small band of rescuers had systematically overpowered the other outlaws and freed the Whispering Pines' hands. Now they converged on the porch, weapons trained on Reed, faces grim with the satisfaction of justice served. Willow approached, her rifle still ready but her eyes fixed on Heath. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice betraying the fear she had controlled while executing her plan. "Nothing serious," Heath assured her, though blood trickled from cuts caused by the broken glass. As Caldwell and several cowboys secured Reed, binding his hands behind his back, Willow helped Heath to his feet. The moment they were standing, she threw her arms around him, heedless of the watching ranch hands. "When I saw them take the ranch, I thought," she couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking. Heath held her tightly, his own relief making him momentarily weak. "I knew you'd find a way," he murmured into her hair. "You're the most capable woman I've ever known." She drew back slightly to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears and fierce pride. "We make a good team, Heath Keller." "The best," he agreed and kissed her there on the porch, surrounded by smiling cowboys and captured outlaws, uncaring of the audience. In the days that followed, as Reed and his gang were transported to Cheyenne to face justice, as the damaged window was repaired and ranch operations returned to normal, Heath and Willow's relationship became the subject of open acknowledgement rather than discreet observation. The Whispering Pines' hands accepted it with minimal surprise. They had seen the connection growing for weeks, and even Tom Riley, visiting to check on Heath, offered gruff congratulations. "About time you found something worth staying put for," the Broken Spur foreman remarked, "though I'll miss having my best horse trainer." The comment highlighted the question that had been hovering unspoken between Heath and Willow: what came next? His contract to train the horses was nearly complete, and technically, he was still employed by the Broken Spur. It was Willow who brought the matter into the open as they sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of purple and gold. "Riley's right," she said, her hand resting comfortably in Heath's. "You are the best horse trainer in the territory. Whispering Pines could use someone with your skills permanently." Heath turned to look at her, reading the deeper question in her eyes. "Are you offering me a job, Miss Fletcher?" Willow's lips curved in a smile that held both amusement and nervousness. "I'm offering you a partnership, Mr. Keller, in every sense of the word." The implication was unmistakable. Heath felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed him of speech. This remarkable woman, who owned the largest ranch in the territory, who could have chosen anyone as a husband, was offering him not just her heart but an equal share in all she had built. "Willow," he began, struggling to find words equal to the moment, "I don't need a partnership in Whispering Pines to want to spend my life with you." "I know," she said softly, "that's why I want to offer it. Because you love me for myself, not for what I possess." She turned more fully toward him, her expression earnest. "But Heath, what I'm trying to say, perhaps badly, is that I want to build something together, not as owner and employee, but as true partners." "Equals." The last of Heath's reservations dissolved at her words. This wasn't charity or condescension, it was recognition of what they could create together, each contributing their strengths to a shared vision. "In that case," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I accept, on one condition." Willow raised an eyebrow, and what might that be? Heath reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, simple ring, his mother's wedding band, the one possession of hers he had kept through all his wandering years. "That you accept this," he said, holding it out to her. "It was my mother's, it's not fancy, but it was given with the same kind of love I feel for you." Tears welled in Willow's eyes as she extended her hand. "It's perfect," she whispered as Heath slid the ring onto her finger. "Absolutely perfect." Their kiss was a promise of partnership, of trust rebuilt from the ashes of past betrayals, of a future neither had imagined possible before a blizzard brought them together in an abandoned cabin. As darkness fell over Whispering Pines, Heath Keller held Willow Fletcher in his arms and marveled at the journey that had brought him here. From the solitary cowboy who believed the frontier was no place for connection, to the man who had found his home and heart in the arms of the woman who owned the biggest ranch in the territory. The road had been neither straight nor easy, but as the first stars appeared in the Wyoming sky, Heath knew with absolute certainty that every step had led exactly where he was meant to be. 3 months later, Whispering Pines hosted the most talked-about wedding the territory had seen in years. Ranchers from across Wyoming gathered to witness Willow Fletcher, the determined Eastern heiress who had defied convention to run her ranch herself, marry Heath Keller, the skilled horseman whose quiet competence had won respect throughout the region. The ceremony was held on the ranch, beneath an arch of wildflowers with the majestic mountains as backdrop. Willow, radiant in a gown of ivory silk that managed to be both elegant and suited to frontier life, walked alone to meet her groom, a statement of independence that surprised no one who knew her. Heath, watching her approach, felt a sense of wonder that this extraordinary woman had chosen him. The walls he had built after his father's death were gone now, replaced by the understanding that true strength lay not in isolation, but in the courage to trust, to connect, to love despite the risks. As they spoke their vows before a gathering of friends and neighbors, the words carried the weight of everything they had overcome to reach this moment. A blizzard that might have claimed Willow's life, Heath's long-held belief that trust led only to betrayal, the attack that had nearly cost them everything, and the gradual, powerful realization that they were stronger together than apart. "I take you, Willow Fletcher, as my wife," Heath said, his voice clear and sure. "To share in all things, to face whatever comes side by side, to build a life that honors the trust we've found in each other." Willow's answering vows were equally heartfelt, her eyes never leaving Heath's as she promised to stand with him through all the challenges the frontier might bring, to create with him a legacy of love and partnership that would endure long after they were gone. As the celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than even hungry cowboys could consume, Heath found a moment alone with his new wife on the same porch where he had proposed. "Happy, Mrs. Keller?" he asked, drawing her close. Willow's smile was radiant in the golden light of lanterns strung throughout the ranch yard. "More than I ever thought possible," she assured him. "And you?" Heath looked out over the expanse of Whispering Pines, the land that had brought them together, the home they would build, the future they would shape side by side. "I spent years believing that the frontier was no place for love," he said thoughtfully. "That survival meant standing alone, trusting no one." He turned back to Willow, lifting a hand to touch her cheek with tender reverence. "You showed me I was wrong. The frontier isn't just about survival, it's about building something worth living for." Willow leaned into his touch, her eyes reflecting the same certainty he felt. "Together," she said softly. "Together," Heath agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the stars emerged above Whispering Pines Ranch, the home that a blizzard, a chance encounter, and the healing power of love had given them both.